Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is a weekly web show on the internet where two gentlemen get to sit down and talk about all things Anglican. What will possess two people to do such a thing? I have no idea. I sit and scratch my head all the time wondering why we do this, but apparently you like it and we like that you like it. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today is February 13th, 2012.
George, we're going to start with Today in History. It's our most famous segment because we talk about things we apparently know nothing about. We're going to go back to 1662, and a lot of our viewers are going to say, oh boy, we're going to talk about that famous prayer book, but no, we're going to talk about the Great Ejectment. And basically what happened was Charles II came to power. His father had to deal with the civil war between the Puritans and the Protestants and the Anglicans and the Catholics, and it was all a mess. And Parliament said, hey, we can put down some rules where people are all on the same page and we'll follow the 1662 prayer book, and they called that the Code of Unity or Uniformity.
Act of Uniformity.
And what happened there, George?
Well, the Act of Uniformity was passed by Parliament, and those who would not abide by it, approximately 2,000 ministers, were ejected from their livings. So the Great Ejectment is not it's not what James Bond's Aston Martin DB5, the passenger seat that shoots villains through the roof. It's when the Church of England purged itself of troublesome problem clergy. That was 1662.
Well, that's kind of odd because if I'm not mistaken, they did the same thing this week. There are some troublesome evangelicals and troublesome Anglo-Catholics in the Church of England that they just decided to eject for no other reason that they don't support women episcopacy.
Yeah, they got shot through the roof of the Church of England's bus. And the funny thing is, the week that this took place, on February 7th, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and the moderator of the United Reformed Church, which is the successor to the old Congregationalists in England, had a joint service where each apologized for the sins of 350 years ago. So maybe, Kevin, in 350 years, that whoever is Archbishop of Canterbury will be apologizing for kicking out the Anglo-Catholics and evangelicals.
I feel prophecy coming on, and I have to concur. In 350 years, whoever the Archbishop of Canterbury and that lowly office is will be saying sorry for something. Okay, George, let's move on to story one, and we're going to talk about Kappa, which is, it's another strange acronym. What's it stand for?
Council of Anglican Provinces of Africa.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Africa, and we're going to talk about Western influence and Western money. Kappa was originally designed to help evangelize and bring Africa as a unit into Christianity, and to bring people to Christ and set up churches and all those types of wonderful things that we're called to do in Matthew 18. The problem being is Westerners got a hold of it and have slowly said, well, yeah, that's important, but we can help you with mosquito nets, education, women's health, eradication of HIV/AIDS, and in the end, that's more important than your Christian thing. Here's money to help you with those things.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. You have to follow the money. Kappa, which started out to sort of bring together all of the African churches after Britain left the continent and decolonialized Africa, to aid each other, to encourage each other, to help build up the faith. Well, Africa has just seen an explosion in the number of Christians, and the Anglican churches have grown wildly.
Sure.
But at the same time, these institutional structures have moved away, as you've said, from proclaiming the gospel to educating, to evangelizing, not in the name of Jesus Christ, but for HIV/AIDS prevention. Now, these things are all well and good. I don't think anybody's going to argue with preventing malaria, preventing AIDS, educating children. But the problem that we're seeing with groups like Kappa, and you saw this yourself when you went to the meeting they put on in Uganda last year for bishops, is that the Bible is pushed to one side, and in its place come social gospel issues.
Yeah, I went to the All African meeting in Uganda, in Tembe, Uganda last year, and the majority of the speakers were United Nations-based speakers, and they were talking about HIV and education and all these different things. And the first 8 to 10 speakers, nobody talked about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had all these famous people from the UN and stuff that were speaking, and it was really amazing to me how the function of Christianity, which is to raise more Christians and bring disciples to Christ, has been put aside for the social issues, and the social issues are to come first. We, as evangelicals, understand that Christianity comes first and begets all the other social issues, not the opposite.
One of the things I think our viewers need to understand about how the Anglican Communion works is that the default position that has arisen over the years is the social gospel, is the sort of busy worker, social worker mentality. Because these are the institutions that have money, that have time, that send people out to try to convince churches to do things that further their agenda. And so the natural step for Kappa is to talk about mosquito netting, not about Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And what was extraordinary over the past 10 years was that big men arose in the African church. Peter Akinola, Henry Arambe, Benjamin Nzimbi, for instance, who basically said, look, stop. Let's put aside the concerns of the day and look at the deeper spiritual issues and bring this church back to its senses. Those men have left the scene, and until the new leaders of the continent arise, the default position will be the social work, busy work, aid work.
Well, one of the difficulties is they have so much trouble keeping their domestic issues in check. They don't have time for the big international issues like they used to. Mm-hmm. You know, they're dealing with Muslim conflict. They're dealing with there's new famines going on in East Africa, in Tanzania and stuff like that, where they don't have time now to deal with these big international issues of presiding with Catherine Shorey or what's going on in the Church of England and all the chaos when they have chaos in their own land.
And there's also a leadership vacuum from the West. Now, people have been speculating whether Rowan Williams is going to retire this year or not. Whether he is or not is immaterial at this point because by his own actions he's made himself a lame duck. And people are not going to go out and advance his cause against the prevailing views because they don't think he's going to be there to back them up.
No, he's... At this point in time, he's made the See of Canterbury pretty irrelevant for what's going on in the international world. He went to India to try and stop corruption. He went to Africa to stop corruption, and they said, yeah, whatever, shook hands, had tea together, he left, and corruption continued. Mm-hmm. So his influence is no longer name-only, person-only. It just doesn't exist.
You need to contrast him with George Carey. Now, George Carey was not Rowan Williams is the darling of the British media. Mm-hmm. George Carey was pretty much disliked because he was dull and stodgy and he reminded people of the boring vicar down the street. George Carey, though, accomplished so much more through the force of his personality and through the fervor and strength of his faith compared to Rowan Williams that there really hasn't been an international Archbishop of Canterbury since George Carey stepped down. That's going to shock people in England because Rowan Williams has been played to them as being such a dynamic, charismatic fellow. But overseas, he has just not sold well.
Not yet. Okay, George, on to story 2, we're going to talk about our President Obama. And people are like, oh, cool, we're going to talk about what he did to the Roman Catholics this week. No, what he did this week, You did to everyone, or you did last week. As of January 31st, those people carrying loans and still working for not-for-profits, social workers, and clergy, have to pay their loans beyond the 10 years. The rules used to be, oh, wait, I made that wrong because this just applies to clergy. Oh, no.
Absolutely right.
That's why we're talking about Anglican Unscripted. What used to be the rule was after 10 years, if you work for a not-for-profit, the federal government would forgive your student loans. So in Georgia's case, you went to Duke, Oxford, Yale. You have a ton of student loans. Yes, way up yonder. And after 10 years, poof, the government would start forgiving those years, everything after 10.
If I made 10 years of payments, they would, if I had a 20-year loan and I made 10 years of payments, years 11 through 20 would be forgiven.
They've changed that. What's the policy now?
Effective January 31st, those who are engaged in ministry, their loans will not be forgiven.
No.
For me, I worked at a hospice for 5-6 years, and I made the same amount of money as a social worker. And the two of us, if we had the student loans, before January 31st, we each would see our loans disappear after the 10th year. After January 31st, the social workers' loans disappear, but not mine.
Interesting. Now, this is bad news for a lot of Anglican Unscripted viewers, especially those from the Shota House, Gordon Conwell, and Trinity. Be careful on your student loans, because if you're going to go work for a church or not-for-profit, you have to pay everything after 10 years now, unless you decide not to become a minister.
Yeah, I mean, you can still be ordained and go to work for Planned Parenthood, and your loans will be forgiven, and then you can go work in a church if you'd like. This is the government. This is sneaky. The government is just once again hammering Christians in the guise of being non-sectarian. They are being sectarian, promoting one view of the world, one view of nature, and again hammering Christians. Just like nuns now have to have birth control. I knew that was a big demanding issue that people had. Nuns have to have birth control, and ministers have to have student loan payments.
Now, what's interesting here, George, is this can go steps further. We've already seen that, hey, they're willing to attack women's services and birth control and force that upon the church. They're willing to force changes in the loan laws to clergy and social workers and not-for-profits. What is to stop them from telling the Roman Catholic Church, hey, we now have to allow for equal opportunity employment here, and you have to allow women to be clergy?
There's nothing. Now, but it's not going to say you have to have women clergy. It's that, well, we're going to tax you in such a way that any advantages that men clergy have to be paid for if you don't have women clergy. In other words, the government, using its ability to tax and to regulate, is going into overdrive to create its version of society, rather than allowing society to create its government.
Bet the forefathers didn't see that coming. George, people who've been longtime viewers of Anglican TV and longtime readers of your articles know what the word depot means. It's basically a acronym for Delegated Episcopal, what is it?
Pastoral oversight.
Pastoral oversight. We don't really remember all these acronyms because this one was never really used. It came out of Pennsylvania, but basically it means if you have a horrible liberal bishop, this was a way to have a conservative bishop be your oversight. You could make negotiations with your liberal bishop, say, listen, we don't want you stealing our endowment fund, our church. Can we please have Bishop Duncan from Pittsburgh, for instance, come and watch over our church? Well, the liberal bishops kept saying that two-letter word called no.
See, depot was designed to overcome pastoral differences between liberal bishops and conservative congregations. Now, the problem is that those places that needed it had the bishops who wouldn't, under any circumstances, countenance it. So in Pennsylvania, the old bishop, Alan Bartlett, did work out some sort of arrangement to allow the Bishop of Quincy to visit Good Shepherd Rosemont, for instance. The new bishop, Charles Bennison, messed everything up and wouldn't give an inch. And so depot never really took off because it was the Benisons of this world that needed to give depot, but it was the Benisons of this church who refused to give depot.
So up till now, the conservatives could never really get a liberal bishop to endorse or engage in depot.
And
However,
and the reason why is if you had the sort of bishop who would allow depot, you didn't need depot. Because, in other words, he or she would basically be respectful of who you were and your traditions, and you really weren't under the gun. It was the nasties that needed depot, but again, the nasties wouldn't play ball.
It's like Catch-22, the Episcopal version.
Yes.
So what's happened now is liberals want to see if they can use depot. There are 3 or 4 liberal churches in Albany, the Diocese of Albany, who said, Bishop Love, you're a great bishop, but you're conservative, and we need somebody of a liberal flavor to oversee and do his charge. And Bishop Love, to his credit, has said, okay, we'll work with depot, but what's going on there?
3 churches, Saranac Lake, one in Schenectady, and one in Albany. I think it's St. Andrews in Albany. There's several in Albany.
Yeah.
Have been in conversation with Bishop Love and Bishop Skip Adams of Central New York to have Bishop Adams assume pastoral oversight, not legal oversight, but pastoral oversight of their congregations. Why is that funny, Kevin? What's causing you to have groans and moans?
They have picked the epitome of liberal bishops. Bishop Spong is not available, obviously.
And Bishop Benison is a little busy.
And so I guess if you're going to pick somebody who really does not like conservatives at all and loves liberals,
and lawsuits,
the Bishop of Central New York would be the one. Now, let's do a little background check on him. He is the bishop who took Good Shepherd Church from Matt Kennedy, the blogger from Stand Firm, took it and would not negotiate with them. And said, hey, I'm going to sell it for half the price to the Muslims, and they made a mosque out of it. This, in his eyes, was a good thing.
In the Living Church, I had several articles written with Steve Waring about a series of lawsuits that Bishop Adams was engaged in with members of his clergy. You can read those, and I have to be very careful about what I say, but they don't reflect well upon the bishop.
No, they do not. So this is, his biography, or what he'll be known for, certainly. And this is who they choose. Now, to Bishop Love's credit, he's willing to work this out. Bishop Love is in the process of working out depot for the liberal churches.
And he really Bishop Love really understands the charism of the episcopacy. In other words, he's acting from a desire out of love for his congregations. That's what we're hearing. That Bishop Love loves his people, and he has the maturity and the wisdom to know that when a situation is not going to be fixed or cannot be made right, one can step back and allow the right situation to arise. Yeah. And I give him credit for having the maturity and the wisdom and the love for his people to step back. Because we've seen a lot of bishops who have displayed none of those aspects.
Sure. And where George and I roll our eyes when we hear about the Bishop of Central New York, we give credit to Love for not rolling his eyes when he hears that name as well. George, this is something you should be introing, but we're going to talk about corruption in the Church of India. And really, in international papers, that's the headline every day.
Well, every week I can write a story about Norbert Kanunga of Harare or corruption in South India.
Sure. And what's basically happened is the corruption is in the clergy and in the bishops. And there's been some attempts by Lambeth and the Church of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury to at least passively say, yes, we know there's a problem, but we know the bishops themselves can fix it. But that hasn't worked yet, has it?
No. There are 21 dioceses in South India, and of those 21 bishops, 13 have either criminal proceedings being brought against them or ecclesial proceedings or complaints in civil court about theft, corruption, abuse of office for financial purposes. That means there are 8 clean bishops and 13 dirty ones.
And, we're not talking about people who are arguing over theology. We're talking about people who are taking money, stealing land, doing some really horrible things because they can wear a purple shirt or they have a collar.
Now, remember, the Church of South India, the Episcopal Relief and Development Fund, sent them millions of dollars following the tsunami, and about half of that money was stolen by the General Secretary, Pauline Satamurthy, of the Church of South India, and she's disappeared. She's on the lam with your money, Episcopalians, $1 million, and that's the Church of South India. It has been fighting a battle against corruption for 20-odd years, but there's been a break in the story, and hopefully good things are going to happen. In the last 10 days, 3 of the dirty bishops are out of office. One died, one was formally expelled, and the other was put on terminal leave. He retires in March, and he was told, don't come back to the office on Monday. All of these men were facing criminal charges for stealing millions of dollars, either selling admissions to medical schools run by the church, taking kickbacks from contractors who were building things, raising mortgages on church land and keeping the money and allowing the mortgages to go in foreclosure so the church would lose property. These guys are really dirty. But the lay people in India are finally beginning to stand up and say enough is enough. And hopefully this move to get rid of 2 and 1 dying, so that now we'll have a majority of good bishops, at least are not corrupt, we may see things change.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch the story because most Anglicans pay attention to things going on here in America, things going on in Europe, and things going on in Africa. Asia and India are kind of off the scope of your average Anglican. That's why we wanted to talk about this week.
The Church of South India is larger, I think, in numbers than the Episcopal Church. It is a vital, dynamic church with tens and hundreds of thousands of faithful Christians and good clergy. But over the past 20 to 25 years, they've allowed a culture of the bishop being untouchable, unchallengeable, to arise. And when you have that culture of the bishop as king, and you get what I call the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker scenario. You get sexual corruption and financial corruption. One of the bishops who died was also facing a sexual harassment lawsuit for allegedly raping one of his secretaries. Sexual corruption and financial corruption come as part of lack of accountability in church leaders.
Sure. And when all the bishops are corrupt, nobody's going to hold anybody accountable, because that means you would hold me accountable.
When Rowan Williams went to visit India last year, he was given a petition by lay people saying, "Please do something." And Rowan Williams said, "Well, I will bring this up with the bishops, and they will handle it. Don't worry."
All right, if you haven't been paying attention, there's been a lot of stuff happening, but not here in America. It's been over in the Church of England. You guys have been debating whether or not to have, for all intents and purposes, women bishops, the women ascending to the episcopacy. You've had for the longest time women clergy and deacons. So what's going on? Why is this so difficult to make the next step?
Okay, well, over here in England, the Church of England has been on the path towards women bishops for the last 4 or 5 years. And we are getting now to the final stages. So what we had was a debate at the synod that's just been this week, and then the final vote will be in the General Synod held in York in the summer.
Now, what I saw within this debate was a multi-level thing. There was what was called the Manchester Amendment.
Manchester motion, yeah.
Yeah. What happened there?
Okay, so what happened was Manchester Diocese put forward a motion which basically asked Synod to ask the bishops to go back to the Archbishop's amendment. Are you following this, Kevin?
Yes, I am.
To go back to the Archbishop's amendment, which was failed last summer by a whisker, which basically wanted to have a more robust protection for conservatives. To ask the House of Bishops to go back to that and to use that to reframe the legislation.
Now, part of the problem here has been, what about the Anglo-Catholics in the Church of England? What would happen to them who do not want to serve under a woman bishop?
Yeah, Yeah, so they've got this co-determined. I don't know what they're called. Co-something bishops was the plan. Both the Anglo-Catholics and the conservative evangelicals had said that this plan would serve them. They will be happy with that. So what happened was this: the motion was put forward. An amendment was put forward by Suffolk Diocese, which basically almost told the House of Bishops to ignore the Conservatives and plough ahead with having women bishops, whatever. And then an amendment to that amendment was proposed by a chap called Spears. I know an amendment to amendment. An amendment to that amendment was proposed, which basically changed the whole motion to say to the House of Bishops, when you look at the legislation before the summer, don't really change anything. So basically steady as she goes. And that motion, that amendment was voted. So the Suffolk amendment was amended to that motion, and then that motion amended the Manchester motion. So what you basically got after 4 or 5 hours of debate was a motion which basically said to the House of Bishops, when you look at the legislation before the summer, we don't want you to change too much, really.
Okay, or yeah, a substantial change.
No substantial change, whatever substantial means.
Okay, so the bishops get together in June, July, and they hash this out.
Before June, July, yes.
Yeah, and they make a decision to go forward and have women bishops, or they make a decision not to.
Well, what they will make a decision is they will take the legislation as it is, and they will make a decision whether to tweak it slightly before it comes to the final vote in synod. That's the choice that they have. Okay,
it comes before everybody in synod, and you have to pass the House of Clergy, Bishops, and Laity.
Yes.
You have 3 houses, right?
We have 3 houses here: House of Bishops, House of Clergy, House of Laity, and a motion of this kind has to pass by 2/3 of those voting in each house, and that's where the interesting numbers start to play.
Sure, because there's no doubt you'd have the bishops and the clergy. What about the laity?
Yeah, it's the House of Laity where the real beard stroking begins. When you looked at the vote that happened on Wednesday, a vote to basically carry on with the legislation as it is, it could not command a 2/3 majority in the House of Laity. Now, that's not to say that all the people who voted no at that point will vote yes in the summer, but it's starting to appear that that's the House where the legislation may fail. Now, let me posit you 2 scenarios, okay? The first scenario is that there are enough people in the House of Laity who want women bishops but want better safeguard for traditionalists. And they will vote no to the legislation in the summer, killing it at that point, basically putting it to rest for another 3 or 4 years. They will vote no to it on that basis. The second scenario, which is possible, is that some of the liberals who want women bishops with almost no safeguards for conservatives. So basically, there are women bishops, and you either suck it or you get lost.
That's an English term?
That's an English terminology. It might be something different over there. You have your fanny packs. We can discuss that one day. They may vote against it on the basis that they bring it down now, and in 5 years' time, when it comes back to synod, they get something better, or at least that they see it as something better. Now, if both of those groups are both voting no against it, it's more than a fair chance that the legislation will fail in the summer.
And so it gets picked up again in several years. But
it will get picked up again in the next sessions. Now, a new General Synod will be elected in like 3.5 years' time, and only then could the legislation be picked up again. And yes, a lot of the donkey work has been done, so they would like start 60, 70 metres down the 100 metres track.
You obviously have seen how this looks in England. How does this make Rowan Williams and the Archbishop of York look? Well,
it's not that Rowan Williams and John Sentamu, put the Manchester motion down. It's called the Manchester motion because it's done by the Diocese of Manchester. But essentially, it was supporting what they proposed last summer. So politically, it's not been the best of weeks for them. And yes, in general, everybody is nice, and we say nice things about our leaders. And once you thrash somebody, you then go and buy them a cup of tea and a cream cake, and everybody's chums again. But there's a sense with all the rumours last summer about Rowan Williams resigning. There's a sense that actually that's what he's going to do. He's going to see out the women bishops legislation either way, and then he's going to go. So in some of the provinces of the Anglican communion, they already see him as a lame duck. I think that's not the case here yet, but we might be getting near that.
Yeah, I think in general, internationally, he's seen as somebody who's leaving in June after the Jubilee. So,
yeah, basically.
And how was the Jubilee this week?
Do you know what? It was understated. There's a magnificent documentary series being done by the BBC. If you can watch iPlayer wherever you are in the world, you can go and watch it on there, where they're basically interviewing literally lots of members of the royal family about her. So it was understated. Some nice prayers issued by the Church of England. It was done in a very English way.
That's good.
We are waiting for the big party in the summer. In the summer, it's going to be. We've got the Queen's Jubilee. We've got the Olympics. It's going to be a pretty awesome summer here.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time, and we'll catch you next week.
All right. See you, Kevin.
My question to you is, if it should pay for sterilization and the morning after pill, why shouldn't insurance also be compelled to pay for abortion services free of charge? Should it?
That's an entirely different issue. What the president has managed here is a compromise that allows women access to contraception, which will reduce the need for abortion. And I think we all can agree that the fewer abortions needed, the better off we all are.
Right, but if abortion's a blessing, why do we need fewer abortions?
Well, the same reason heart transplants are a blessing, but we'd prefer not to have people need them. The late-term abortions take place to save women's lives. It would be wonderful if fewer women needed that.
But you still stand by your statement that abortions are blessings?
When you need them. So is cardiac surgery when you need it, though I'd prefer never to need it.
So a sick heart is the same as a beating heart in a child?
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time debating that. I think you're completely missing the mark.
No, we should,
and twisting
but I think
the conversation.
you would prefer,
we could do that, but that's not what's on the table today.
Right, but you would prefer that abortion's covered under this mandate as well. I mean, that's no secret, right?
I am delighted at what he has been able to accomplish, and I am perfectly happy to applaud that.
I want to welcome our West Coast legal provider, policymaker, and all things Anglican contributor, Alan Haley. And we're going to delve off from Anglicanism today. Well, it kind of does affect Anglicans, but right now it affects Roman Catholic institutions, not the churches. But the Obama administration has made a new policy, and the policy basically says, well, they made a change to this policy, but the mandate from the HHS is churches must pay for insurance. Insurance must cover abortions, birth control, and all these other things. Then there was a kind of a compromise made this week, and the compromise says the religious institutions must pay for insurance, and the insurance must pay for birth control, abortions, and other things. Kind of a strange compromise.
Well, first of all, that word compromise now, that's no-no to the Obama administration. They did not compromise. They accommodated. And that is the whole story right there. The power, it all comes from the top down, and the Catholic Church is just going to have to accept whatever Obama finally decides to, how he decides to implement Obamacare. This is all part of Obamacare, remember. And telling the insurance companies what kind of insurance coverage they have to provide to employees for their employers. And so we have a situation, I think Mark Stein in a column this weekend expressed it best when he said that Obama has pulled a Henry VIII on the Catholic Church again, dictating to them precisely what they have to do to, meet federal requirements of federal law. And so it's a situation where there's just you know, they don't have any negotiating room at all other than their political and moral force that they can summon from their constituents. And meanwhile, they've had, of course, they have Catholics coming out like Nancy Pelosi saying this is a great thing, and they have Episcopalians coming out like Dean Catherine Ragsdale of the Episcopal Theological Seminary in Cambridge, coming out and saying, "Oh, this is a marvelous thing. Obama has found the magic touch here to reconcile one's religious conscience with the requirements that all women have access to free health care." Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how things get distorted, because what's really at stake here is not so much first of all, it's the usual transformation of something that is a privilege or that you can purchase into a right. And so we have them speaking now of a woman's right to free contraception, free abortifacient services. So far, they have not gone so far as to make actual abortion operations themselves, but of course you can go to Planned Parenthood for that anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's really, in this case, providing free healthcare as a right, and the real issue at stake here, Kevin, is the First Amendment rights. There is no right to free healthcare at this point in the country, but there is a right to religious freedom of practice, freedom of expression. And that's what this infringes on, because it makes Catholic employers of whatever kind, whether they're a church or an institution or a school and a hospital, under this new mandate, they're given a year before it kicks in, but they will be forced to provide insurance. And once they select an insurer, that insurer has to agree to cover any employee that asks for this kind of abortion practices and abortion insurance coverage. And I'm sorry to keep using the word abortion, because that's ultimately what we're talking about here, but it's contraception and, as they say, abortifacients, mm-hmm. and morning after pills and things like that. So they're saying that the insurance company is going to have to provide that coverage, and it will be at no cost to the employee, and of course at no cost to the employer. Well, think again how that works. It has to be at cost to someone. Someone has to pay for those pills and pay for the contraception stuff, and so the insurance company is going to have to reimburse the people who provide it with the money that it collects from the people who are paying the insurance coverage, namely the employers. So instead of forcing the Catholic Church to provide a policy with it, he's played a shell game now and said, well, the church doesn't have to directly provide the policy, but it does have to select the insurer who has to provide the coverage, and of course will be charging the church. And that doesn't fly with the Conference of Catholic Bishops. It doesn't fly with anyone who's a rational mind to see what's going on here. This is all just shell game and trickery.
Well, it is a shell game, because we go back to when this was first passed. They passed the law, but the law included a lot of this stuff that would be decided in the future. We're going to decide how to work with religious institutions in the future. We'll decide how to make other policies that we don't know how to do yet in the future, and how much this is going to cost. And what I've seen here, and I know in legal circles, you've heard of what's called the 13th chime.
Yeah.
Okay, where when you hit the 13th chime, it calls into account all the previous chimes as probably not being accurate. Right. Because you've hit the 13th chime. This is kind of like the 13th promise being broken here, and calling all his other promises into the eye of the beholder. What promises is he going to break now?
Yeah, we see, for example, this first comes out in a directive from Kathleen Sebelius, mm-hmm. In his cabinet, and then he changes it at will after supposedly this is a final rule. I mean, they published this in the Federal Register, and they went through all the comment period and became a final rule. So now he says, oh, well, we'll just change that. We'll modify it here and make it look like this. And so it's all top down. It's not negotiated. He pretends to be balancing various interests. No, he's deciding what will be offered and what will not be offered, and who has to do it. So, and the churches are just another factor in his political life, instead of a constituency that is protected under the Constitution.
I wonder how many of our viewers are waiting for the 13th chime of your clock in the background. You and I both read an interesting thing from Mark Stein about how this is a Henryist moment for the church. Can you get that quote in front of you?
Yeah, I do, and let me give you that, because he says, it starts with the 1534 Act of Supremacy. And he says, the title of the law gives you the general upshot, but just in case you're a bit slow on the uptake, the text proclaims that the King's Majesty justly and rightfully is and ought to be the supreme head of the Church of England. So with that comes all honors, dignities, preeminences, jurisdictions, privileges, authorities, immunities, profits, and commodities to the said dignity, not to mention that His Majesty shall have full power and authority from time to time to visit, repress, redress, record, order, correct, restrain, and amend all such errors, heresies, abuses, offenses, contempts, and enormities whatsoever they be. And then he says, welcome to Obamacare.
Amen. Oh, Alan, there's not a week that goes by that we're not going to find something newsworthy to cover with law and religion.
Actually, I have to add a small footnote to this. Mark Stein also takes note of that wonderful theologian, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Oh, yes.
And his comment on this whole thing, announcing that he supported it, was, if we are going to have a separation of church and state, we're going to have a separation of church and state.
That is so profound. I mean, that he obviously a legal scholar, a Supreme Court scholar, and
and to think we're placing our religious rights in such hand that has the key to the whole thing, obviously, right there.
Well, the key to the whole thing is going to be it's being brought before the Supreme Court, real quick, whether or not the individual mandate is constitutional. Yeah,
and the key there too will be because Congress did not put a severance clause in the legislation, so that if in other words, the usual severance clause says that if any part of this statute is found to be unconstitutional, the rest of it remains in effect as far as possible.
Right.
But they left that out, and so if Obamacare is struck down on the individual mandate, the whole thing goes down.
Which, at this point, I say thank God, if that happens, because we as Americans do want to provide for people who do not have. That's just a general part of who we are as Americans. But to put it into law in this way, Obama was quoted last week as at the National Prayer Breakfast. He quoted Jesus and quoted the New Testament and said, "Much will be required of those who have more." And which is great, and that is what God does require, but it's not the rule of government to require it.
No, and that's the point. It's God who's making the requirement. So you have Obama here equating himself with God. Some people will have to say that, conclude that, given the high-handed way he's dealing with the Catholic Church. And it remains to be seen how much loyalty the bishops will be able to command in a political sense come the election this fall, because he has not placated anyone at the high levels of the Catholic Church with this shell game.
Yeah, and it is the high levels that are responding right now. We can be honest and say that a lot of Roman Catholics take birth control measures, and that this may not be as populous to them as it is to their bishops and clergy. But I think that the whole bad press of the overreaching effect Obamacare is having, and Obama and the head of the HSS is doing, is really going to be symptomatic of, if he can do this, what can't he do?
Yeah, and there's another interesting statistic I saw recently. I can just illustrate it graphically with my hands, but the whole story of what's gone on with spending, if you look at spending on military defense and all the various things, education, the line goes like that. But if you look at the spending on entitlements, it goes like this.
Oh, sure.
And it's out of sight. It's over $7,000 per capita right now on entitlements. And the spending on defense is down around under $1,000 per capita on entitlements. So this country is going south on its entitlements. And that's exactly the kind of thing, as I say, that you watched how they translated health care into a right to free health care. And that's an entitlement, another entitlement. It's going to be a monstrous cost, and I don't think we can afford it.
We can't. In fact, the only country right now that is being successful is Norway, because they have vast natural resources. They're using the oil they sell to help fund their social programs.
Right.
We aren't digging or doing anything to get our natural resources, to use that as a commodity to help pay for the programs we want. We tax the rich and grab the money in a Robin Hood fashion.
Right.
So,
Right. We're also increasingly taxing the middle class to pay for benefits to the middle class. I mean, it's kind of, it's just, of course, minus a little cut there in Washington.
yes.
But it's, it's just kind of recirculating, regurgitating all the country's, economy through a major section of the economy has to run through the government in order to come out to where it goes. And that, it's just there's a no-win formula there, because as the government takes over more and more of the economy, there was a classic question that President Grover Cleveland asked back in around 1890. He said, if the government supports the people, who will support the government?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's it.
We're this close to being Greece.
Right.
Which is, it's sad but true. You can't give away everything if you have nothing to support that with. Alan, I want to thank you for your time. We'll, of course, have another great segment next week, so thanks to the wonderful Episcopal Church who keeps us going. God bless and have a great week. Okay, George, as we've done for several weeks, we're going to talk about EMEA. The Washington Post finally caught on to what's going on with the Anglican mission in America, and they posted a story this week that had some interesting quotes and numbers and stuff like that. And I thought we should go over some of the facts that they kind of missed. I don't know how they got the story, but it kind of looks like a certain blogger called them up who had connections at the Washington Post and fed them the story, because he's quoted quite thoroughly throughout it. But the story is the Anglican Mission in America is splitting over money into other issues. That's true. Mm-hmm. The story is that only a few churches, maybe 20 or so, are leaving in the Anglican Mission in America, and all is well. Is that true, George?
I really am excited and waiting to see how this turns out, because Kevin, do you remember that movie Animal House, where towards the end Kevin Bacon in his ROTC uniform holds up his hands to the crowd saying, "All is well, do not panic," and then the crowd runs him over and grinds him into the dirt?
Yeah, that was his first role.
Yeah, and I think the AMIA is going to see the same thing happen. 20 churches, I think, is a very, very lowball figure.
No. You and I both heard the figure. A minimum of 60 churches have initiated the process to move out of EMEA and either into Rwanda under PAIR, into this Moving Forward movement, or directly under ACNA. Mm-hmm. Now, unofficially, I've heard a high estimate of 80 to 100, which in reality is more than half, it's 2/3 of what the existing parishes in EMEA are making sub-move outside of EMEA. They have another 100 or so churches in formation. I don't have any numbers about what they're doing.
If the numbers, in the article in the Washington Post said 5, 10, 20. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, I think you and I have spoken to those 5, 10, 20. I mean, we know who they are. But then we know there are another 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 who are in the process as well. So we don't know what the original quote was, so let's give her the benefit of the doubt and saying maybe 20 people have said to Chuck Murphy's face, "We're out of here."
Sure.
And maybe there are another 60 who haven't made that information public. But whatever it turns out, I do think we're going to see significant exodus from the Pawleys Island group.
I don't think they'll be going with Depot. Okay, we're going to close the show. We're closing episode 28 of Anglican Unscripted, and we really want to thank you for watching. It's really important to us that you've been giving us a lot of feedback, a lot of email, correcting us where we're wrong, encouraging us to continue with this ministry, and it's really been an interesting time for George and I. George and I every week look forward to doing this. It's a lot of fun to do. We have a lot of fun off camera that you don't get to see because, well, we're good friends and good buddies. But I want to encourage you to keep contacting us. And why is that important, George?
For encouragement, for information. We really do enjoy. We read every one of the emails we get, and we can't talk about them back and forth. Some we think, my goodness, what was this guy? Was he watching the show? But it does allow us to form and strengthen the work that we're doing. This is a ministry, and we are servants to truth.
Yeah. In fact, we got a really interesting email. I'm not teasing about this email, but I want to delve into the breadth of emails. A gentleman asked where you get your wonderful clergy clothing this week.
Yes, and next week I'll be wearing a little thing that says Kentucky Fried Chicken, and
that's right.
We're going to take a cue from NASCAR and plaster our bodies with promotional endorsements. So this space here for rent.
That's right. No, it is really interesting that all the people who get different things from our show, and it's so nice to have that type of feedback. But what I want to ask for now is that you keep us in prayer. George and I have been under a lot of spiritual attack the last 4 and 5 weeks that we've done Anglican Unscripted, and it's really getting worse and worse. And we need you guys to be in prayer and protection for us. Putting the show together is just not sitting on a Saturday afternoon talking to a webcam. And it takes a lot of time, development, reading stories and background, but also involves our families and keeping them protected. And we're noticing a lot of things that just aren't really spiritual attacks, and we need you to keep us in your prayers. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and thank you for watching episode 28 of Anglican Unscripted.